Okay. I am the host now. How's everybody? Everybody good? Dr. Payne, don't tell me that you have caught the Steve Laws disease and started drinking Diet Mountain Dews, have you? Diet Sundrop? Nah, that's okay then. We'll let you slide on that one.
It's my go-to tonight. I really like that Dr. Pepper, but I was out and this is the only thing cold.
Okay. All right. All right. Before Dr. Payne actually gets started teaching you something, I just have a couple reminders for you. We've covered the cap, so we've got one turned in already. So try to start finishing up your skip. Go ahead when you submit it to me. Remember, I can't do the turning in and grading. Dr. Payne has to do that. But when you submit it to me and I tell you to submit it to turn it in and assignment Dropbox, go ahead and drop it in task stream. If there's a problem, we'll figure it out later. If there's a problem on that. Now, in tangential to that is this. Some of you are getting higher scores than you should, not based on you're not citing your references and you're not cheating. That's not what I'm saying. But one of the things that you're doing, which I want to caution you about, especially as you move into your administrative career, is when somebody from the central office asks you for something, that's all they want. Yeah, organizationally, one of the things that we talk about, at the central office or the organizational level is just because you can doesn't mean you should. I said, Dale, what in the world are you talking about? If it asks for A, B, and C, then we want A, B, and C. Now you may have D, E, F, and G as well. We don't want that. So what we're seeing is you're putting a lot of stuff in your evidences, or some of you are putting some stuff in your evidences, and we're going to talk to you individually about it, that it's not a problem other than it's just extra stuff that you weren't asked for. That's not a bad thing for us because we can separate it out when we do turn it in. I'm not saying that you're causing any problem, but you got to get out of the habit of when the central office has due dates, things to turn in, that you simply address what they've asked you for, because you're not going to have enough. It becomes a time management issue. I had to have this discussion, as I told you, with my doctoral students this weekend. We had weekend class. I had to have this discussion with them. I said, if you do everything like this, you're going to be spending 100 hours a week on the job and you're going to burn out. We could all do better if we had more time. And so we can't just say, I'm going to add all this extra stuff. Or the corollary is, it's in here somewhere. It's your job to find it. People in central office don't appreciate that, by the way. That tends to make them angry. If they want something, give them exactly what they want. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this now, the relevancy to you folks is going forward when we get to the SIOP, I have a template for you, and it tells you where you're going to find everything they ask you for. The biggest mistake students make is it says, oh, this task, and this task, and guess what they do? Let's go copy and paste those 3 tasks. No, the answer to the prompt can be found in these areas. I'm not asking you to go do a copy and paste. I'm not making this up. I had a SIOP turned in this summer, which should be somewhere in the 60 to 80 page range. That was 360 pages. She just copied all of her first 5. She took all of her first 5 evidences, put them together and sent them in and said, here, you figure it out. Yeah, no. We wanted her school improvement plan, but we want it in a way that's that we can read and we can understand, and it's kind of all summarized together. She turned in 360 pages. She just simply took all 5 evidences and sent them in. And then I've graded, I've not, but I've looked at 2 that have come in so far, the same thing, 120, 130, 160 pages. You got to get into the habit as a school administrator of this is what they want. Get to the point, give folks what they want. Don't make them wade through extra pages, extra documents. Be specific and to the point. And so when we look at some of your Turnitin scores this semester, and I went back and looked at them, said, what's the problem here? Oh, they just got a bunch of stuff from their, from their app cell in here, or they've got stuff from their OMA in here that they weren't asked for, that it was just easier just to stuff it all in there. You got to get out of that habit. You got to start learning to edit yourself. That is a big function, a big time saver. I had to have that come to Jesus meeting with my doctoral students. They all come in bleary-eyed over the weekend. Oh, we're spending all this time. Well, that's on you. You got a lot of amount of time, and then move on. We could all do better if we had more time. So that's my rant for the evening. I'm enjoying reading your work. It's all good. Dr. Payne, the floor is yours.
I was talking and did not push unmute. So give me 2 seconds and let me pull this up. You were much quicker than I expected you to be. So let me make you big screen. Okay, there everybody is. How are y'all doing? I am going to share my screen and get started so that we can maximize everybody's time. We have a big night tonight. So we have our chapter 9 presentation by Megan, and then we have Emily with chapter 10, and then we're going to follow the same protocol we did last week. We've got another classroom evaluation we're going to do, and we're going to go through and look at what is it that we see going on in the classroom, how are they doing, what is it that we will focus on. And then tonight, I'm going to put you in groups of 2 instead of in the big groups, so that when you go through and do your feedback, you're going to talk about how would this look in a coaching, get better, faster strategy type of conference. Remember when we watched the video 2 weeks ago and she said, tell me what you think you did really well. Tell me what you're working on. What did you think? And he starts talking and then they practice that skill. How would that look in this type of evaluation? So that's our plan for tonight. Does anybody, before we get started, I do want to tell you we've got Saturday night, or no nighttime. Saturday is 9 until 2. We're going to open with Dr. Booker right at 9. And then we will have middle school. So middle school curriculum and instruction will be coming to present on their instructional model, on where their pacing is, how they monitor, and then we will finish up with chapters 6 through 10 of Crucial Conversations. So I will, in just a second, I will send out who's doing which chapters, and we will do that whole process of practicing our presentation to where you become an expert for your chapter. We will split up into 2 groups. Those 2 groups will create a group presentation, and then we will present. I think Dr. Booker is staying for the presentations this time because he said he wants to see some of the good work that you're doing. So this will give you an opportunity to shine in front of him and show him the growth and development in the area of becoming instructional presenters as well. So before I'm going to quit sharing my screen. Does anybody have questions? Everybody good? Okay, so Megan, it is all you.
Wood, did you have a question before I get started?
I did. I don't know that
sorry.
I made it into the group chat last time. The assignments.
I'll make sure you're there.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, Megan, it's all you.
All righty. 1 second. All right. All right, can everybody see that? I'm going to put a link in the chat box for you. We're going to need that in just a minute. All right, are we good to go? Can everybody see this?
We're
And somebody
good.
like-
Yes, ma'am, you're good.
Okay, just checking. All right, so I have the chapter 9, which is the vocabulary acquisition model. And obviously it is about vocabulary. So before we get started, I want to know, what are some ways you teach vocabulary in your instruction, in your area, whatever it may be? How do you teach that vocabulary?
We use Frayer frames.
Anyone else?
We do a integration. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wasn't teaching the math class, but I've seen our math teachers take a lot of their story problems and they go through all of the vocabulary. Like today, one of the questions was about a linen closet. And she asked the children, what is a linen closet? And just to try to help make those connections. And I was surprised at some of the answers they gave because they didn't know what linen was.
Yeah, you would be surprised.
We went through with our English department and they did like the word within the word thing where it's stems of words, and with the history or world history classes with the freshmen, and took words like democracy, demos people, and crises government, so they can, you know, kind of piece that together, and that's supported what they're learning in the English classes as well. So it's kind of a integration between English and history.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because that's part of what we're going to be talking about. All of those things are included in what the vocabulary acquisition is. So I'm excited to hear that. If you will go ahead and click on the link in the chat box, this is going to be a little pre-test before we get started. I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds. It's only 3 questions. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go forward. So what is the vocabulary acquisition model? Well, first it was coined by Thomas Estes, and he was the first to kind of formalize its steps. But it's also a teacher guided model, and that's going to help, you know, facilitate students' development of vocabulary. The teacher is really going to be the person to help them understand deep, you know, the vocabulary words and get deeper meanings out of it. It's procedural and inductive in manner. And so we talked about the inductive model in chapter 8 with Ms. Jordan. And this is going to enable that deep understanding of key vocabulary in each academic discipline. So we're going to talk about how that academic discipline kind of builds on top of each other. And it's going to develop students' own understanding. This is going to be through analysis of the parts of the word and its meaning. So there are types of knowledge that the model is best suited to teach is the factual knowledge of vocabulary words and supports the development of conceptual knowledge. So this is stretching beyond those basic levels of the cognitive process. And it's going to really encourage students to go beyond remembering and understanding vocabulary. The model is going to challenge students to achieve like a very deep understanding as they apply the word within context, and that's going to help them analyze its structure and just really overall support that deeper understanding of the word. All right, this is a quote that was in the book that I really enjoyed. It says, mastery of academic language is arguably the single most important determinant of academic success for individual students. And it's really important that the vocabulary acquisition is supported by research. And the research is saying that comprehension is highly correlated with vocabulary knowledge. So without the vocabulary knowledge, their comprehension may struggle. So we're going to move on to when to use the model. Well, really, you can use it in all subject areas. However, you want to really be strategic and intentional in the words you want to use. Like Wood said, you know, they're using the word democracy to kind of break it down, but it's also relaying into that ELA, that English area as well. And the best time to use the model is when you want students to comprehend words that are foundational for learning. So you really want to pick words that are intentional, that are going to be important for your lesson and future lessons. All right, So there are two main purposes when needed for a deeper understanding, and the first is the etymology. And this is going to be the tracing of the word, how the word came to be, and how it's changed over time. The second is going to be the morphology. That is the study and description of the word formation. And then the last thing, there are three different activities for deep understanding. We have association, which is the student's ability to make connections between a word. Comprehension, which is the ability to demonstrate their knowledge. That's by using it in a sentence, giving synonyms, antonyms, acronyms, whatever it may be. And then generation, that is the application of the word in a novel situation or by defining the word in their own terms. So they're actually using the word in, the lesson, or they're giving a definition that they understand. All right, and here is a good example of making sure that you're using it in the right context. So we have this word ruler. For math, this is obviously a term for measurement. We have rulers to measure centimeters, inches, even like yardsticks. But for history and social studies, that's going to be like a person who ruled over a country. So it's super important that the student's using the word in the right context and they understand that words can have different meanings. So there are several steps to using the vocabulary acquisition model. And the first step is going to be the pretest. You all have just had a pretest. This is going to assess what knowledge you may have already known before we started the presentation. And this is going to look like in a classroom where teachers are going to ask students to spell the word, maybe define the word, and there are no wrong answers. Students are just giving their best answers to what they think the word means. The second step is to elaborate and discuss. And this is where the teacher is going to ask students to explain their answers. And this would be a great time to let students work together, share their findings, collaborate, and see if they had similar meanings. The third step is to explore. This is to, you really start to explore the meaning of the words. You may ask the student to recognize any patterns, the meanings, and then that's when you're going to present the etymology and morphology of the word. And then students will begin to recognize that, hey, this word may have multiple meanings that they didn't know. The fourth is to study, read, and review. So you're going to make sure to use words within context. And this is great for when you need to scaffold ideas for students and differentiate. You can study in varied contexts. You can have objects and examples that represent the word, and it's going to reiterate its meaning. That's where you can really be creative and let students think out of the box. And then you have your post-test. This is just testing understanding and comprehension through assessment. It could be formative, like a quiz or a game, but it could also be summative, like a test. Again, you're just going to assess did the student learn the word and understand its meaning. All right, so we are going to talk about planning and differentiation. So with planning, you're going to choose vocabulary that is essential to students' understanding of its content. So the types of content may be choosing vocabulary words that are foundational for other learnings, just like Wood's example. A good starting point is to use your curriculum, use your textbooks or whatever you may have. You also might want to be aware that you don't want to introduce too many vocabulary words at a time because that's going to overwhelm students, but you can be intentional in the ones that you choose. All right, so this seems pretty straightforward, but teachers have to learn the etymology and morphology of the word themselves. So they've got to have a solid understanding so they can actually guide the students and facilitate their learning. In many cases, the teacher is going to guide and tell students the components of the vocabulary and again, kind of help them understand that a word may have, multiple meanings and dig into that deeper understanding. You're going to select meaningful resources in context. You're going to let students explore the word in a meaningful context, provide resources that are going to demonstrate multiple and interesting use of the word. You can use print resources, encyclopedias, dictionaries, bring those out. You can even use Google, or an online dictionary. But you could also use things like audio, video, and multimedia to help all learners, because some are visual, some are, just different types of learning. And then you are going to scaffold. So scaffolding the lesson provides layers of learning, and the teacher might scaffold the different phases of the model to introduce the words in phases so that that student is really getting a deeper understanding of it. All right, and with differentiation, you can kind of have fun with this. With content, you can use different types: newspapers, magazines, radio broadcasts. You can really vary the material according to reading level or whatever it may be. And you can use video and audio, or even about like your own demonstration. And with process, teachers are going to apply the process of the model in different ways. You can group students together. They can group together by themselves. You can put them by ability level. It's really up to you. And then you can use different graphic organizers to read and study vocabulary. Like Savannah said, they use the Freyer frame. That's a super popular one. And product, teachers can choose the evaluation that they want to assess students on. This could be closed, your traditional tests, or it could be open where they do a project or some kind of creative assignment where they have to present it or just use the word in that context. So these are some different things you can do with vocabulary acquisition in the classroom. You can use graphic organizers, that's vocabulary journals, word walls, the Freyer frames, however you want it, that's really up to you. Crossword puzzles can be fun. This was writing an obituary. That seems sad, but it would help. Bring in real examples, acting out imaginary dialogue so they can use a script and use the word, like write their own script. Poems and songs, you can pull up poems and songs that would really help understand the word better. And you can have them write a letter, making sure to use that word. All right, so I'm going to link this Padlet into the chat. And we are actually going to do a Freyer frame with the word approximate. So let me move this over. All right, so if you will go into the Padlet, you are going to define the word approximate in your own words. You're going to list some facts. I'm not sure there's really many characteristics to the word, but you can definitely list facts. What examples that the word approximate goes with and what are non-examples. We know that Angie talked about that in her lesson, the examples and non-examples. So this is really great when it comes to vocabulary. I'm going to give you a minute. So I see as close as possible without being exact, just about, almost, close to. All right, great. Now let's move over to facts and characteristics. What is a fact about the word approximate? It's not exact. It's close. Yes, that is great. It can be used to determine time or location. It's an estimate. Used to locate. I like that one. Similar. Good job. So let's go over to examples and list some examples that you may have when using the word approximate. This is very common in math. You use it a lot. And then, you use it outside of school. Approximately how far do I have to go? Measuring and cooking, yes. Distance, time. Bus pickup. What time do I have to be there? Yeah. My arrival time. I love it. All right, let's move on to non-examples. What are non-examples of the word approximate? Exact. 3 pounds. Yes. So a lot of times, like 3 pounds is just the number. Is, you know, we didn't round it. Precise. 7 sharp. All right, good job. So this is something that you could easily do with your students. If you wanted to, you know, not print out a million copies of a Frayer frame, you could definitely put it into a Padlet like this and let them fill it out and see other people's responses. And that brings in that collaborative piece. All right, so what are the benefits of using this model? Well, you have a deeper understanding of words. This is going to help understand specific vocabulary, complexity, and composition of the words. You are going to teach to examine etymology and morphology. So you're going to have those students actually break down the word, and you're going to have them decipher and understand word parts. And it's going to help with spelling. And it's also going to help students to decode and comprehend other words. So linked to prior knowledge, you're going to make connections to that prior knowledge, which is consistent with cognition, and helps to dispel the misconceptions that students might already have about the word. So again, they may think the word ruler only means what you use in math. They might not know it has a different meaning. So you can address various learners' needs. I think this is really easy to use to kind of differentiate. And it's going to accommodate the way students demonstrate their prior knowledge, how they explore the words, practice meaning, and demonstrate their understanding. You are going to practice in different contexts. This is where you can get really fun. You can provide the opportunity to learn more about vocabulary, multiple meanings, you know, have them apply it in different contexts and use it, you know, just various ways to get that deeper understanding. And the transfer of knowledge. So this is what, you know, the Woods example is, you're going to have those kids apply those understanding of concepts and facts, and then you can use that in another class. It's going to transfer over, and, you know, they can share their knowledge as well as retain that information. I think that's the biggest piece, is you want to have them retain. All right, so this is pulling in more technology. So there are all these different ways for planning, implementing, and assessing, and different tools that you can use. Things like SurveyMonkey that we all know, dictionary.com is an easy one, google.com, but you can have drawing and painting tools. These are just some examples, and you can really use what you would like. I did test a few of these, and you have to be careful because sometimes the county has blocked it, like Quiblo.com. The county has blocked that one. So you might have to play around with some of these and see which ones you like. All right, and so this, we are going to take the post test. I'm going to link it, and this is the last one. All right. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong one. Let me try this again. There we go. All right, so this is going to be the same exact test, and you're going to see if you did better on it than you did the first time. And I would love to hear if you did do better on it for the post test than you did the pre-test.
Both times.
If you read the chapter, it was pretty simple, but a lot of people don't even know what the words etymology and morphology are. So I thought it was a good little.
They're great questions, really good questions.
Megan, I know them only because of letters training. hearing that all the time now.
And that is it for me. Thank y'all.
And snaps for Megan. Good job. Does anybody have questions? We used Freyer model all the time in book clubs when we were doing our, when the kids would assign their, whatever their jobs are. I've been out of it long enough that I can't remember the individual jobs. But anyway, they would use the Freyer model a lot. I love how you made it into a Padlet, save all those copies, but it was still just as engaging, and look at how many more people actually participated in that. So great job with that. Anybody got questions or feedback?
Megan, I'm going to use that tomorrow, by the way, that Padlet Freyer model. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great to use it in a Padlet and you can see everybody else's answers instead of having to pair up, and you can have more of a class discussion about it.
Mhm. That's the way technology is not just a substitution, right? It does substitute for it, but it takes it to that next level. Is that augmentation, maybe, where we've changed it up a little bit to now it's more collaborative in nature? Angie, you're my tech person. You have to tell me if that's the right place.
I think it is. But I really like that too, actually, because it reminds me also what Daphne said, like the kids, they look at other people's sticky notes and stuff. So I think it did generate more words. It was good.
Okay, let me go back to my agenda. Who is next today?
It's me.
Emily. I didn't even see your face. Okay. Emily, you are next, so you can take the floor, and I'm going to mute myself, and we look forward to hearing what you've got for us.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and send both of the links that y'all will need for my presentation in the chat, if it will go through before I start to share. Okay. And then can you all see my slideshow? I can't see you though. So can somebody say?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, you're good.
All right. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about the inquiry model. So here is just a little bit of background information. It's very obvious that today we live in a world that we can get information overload. It may become easy for us to say that there is no need for us to search and create new knowledge. And that is where inquiry-based teaching and learning becomes more important. So a student's involvement in inquiry and discovery is so important because it helps them to develop those critical thinking skills, allowing them to integrate information that they have at their fingertips into real situations, which leads them to ask good questions, forming their own ideas, carrying out processes to answer those questions, and the ability to assess their own learning. So the inquiry model is the process of asking those meaningful questions, finding information, drawing conclusions, and reflecting on possible solutions. And here I have the history of inquiry. So each listed inquiry model has been developed due to community needs and a way to approach their specific problems. And of course, the method being most well known is the scientific method. And what is learned in the inquiry process helps students to deeply understand, retain, and transfer that knowledge across subject areas and real-world situations. This allows students to gain an appreciation for past discoveries and teaches them techniques in finding new information in the future. This is what we all want, for our students to be more engaged and interested in their learning. Developing those skills needed to build on their curiosity and to become a lifelong learner. So, in what ways are you using inquiry model in your classroom currently? So if y'all will click on that link for the Padlet. And just tell me any ways that you are currently using inquiry in your classroom. And this is going to kind of serve as our pre-assessment to see what we might have some understanding already. Is it letting y'all click on that? Oh, there it
Yes.
is. Thank you. So social studies, inquiry-based driven lessons, math, science and social studies, and science experiments, health lessons, gizmos, science and social studies, music instruments. Still says somebody's typing, but okay. So awesome. Oh, and I saw ready math before I switched back. So awesome. So you guys are already using some of these in the classroom, which is awesome. So now I want us to look at the levels of inquiry, and we will come back to talk about a few of those things in just a few minutes. So there are 4 levels of inquiry, and they are based off of how much guidance and structure teachers provide for an inquiry model lesson. All right, so some academic content corresponds better with lessons that involve more structured approaches and others more open-ended. It helps to have an understanding of these 4 levels of inquiry in order to understand which one to use. So when teaching using the confirmation level, the teacher already knows the outcome of the lesson while still allowing the students to work through the process and to learn the outcome on their own. When the structured model is being used, the teacher will not only present a question, but also list out the procedures to determine the outcome. When using the guided method or the guided level, the teacher will still present a question. However, the students will decide what procedures and design they want to take their investigation. And the final level is open. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's open for the students to form their own posing question as well as their own design for investigating an outcome. And it should be noted that problem solving is a skill that should be taught and practiced frequently. This is not a skill that our students are born with or pick up after using one time. It's a procedural process that requires repeated exposure, modeling, guidance, and practice. This is a skill that all students can and should learn. So inquiry currently used in Gaston County schools. So does anyone know of any current GCS subject matter and resources that are inquiry based?
The
New
C3
social studies. Yeah.
Inquiry models.
Yes, so our social studies. So as NCDPI's requirements, inquiry is embedded into the new social studies units and standards, and this is to promote critical thinking and is an expectation for all levels K-12. And Gaston County Schools felt so strongly about this initiative that they created a team of teachers to write the inquiry units for every social studies class. And we even have 2 of our own teachers with us currently who served on those teams. So thank you, ladies. And next up, we have the 6 steps of the inquiry model. It can, like I said, consist of 6 major steps. Identification, let me go to the next. Identification, hypothesis, gather data, analyze data, generate findings, and analyze process. Understanding these steps in correspondence with the levels of inquiry will help you as the teacher to better prepare and have supports in place for students to embark on inquiry. So step 1 of the inquiry model is the identification. And this is where, depending on the objective of the lesson and the level of inquiry, will determine if the teacher will pose the question like in structured inquiry, or if the student will form a question on their own like in open inquiry. So either way, this will serve as their starting point and be the focus for the remainder of the lesson. Step 2 is the student will form a hypothesis or an educated guess of what they feel the outcome will be. Some students who have not had much practice might need some additional guidance here that could be given whole group or in small groups. Step 3 is gathering data. And no matter the level of inquiry, it's important that teachers provide some sort of scaffolding. And this will allow the students to learn gradually And this can be done with worksheets, spreadsheets, or other tools. And we should never assume that our students are able to organize this data. This is where understanding the different levels of inquiry will really come in handy, being able to pinpoint where the students are in their understanding to know how to best support them in this process. And step 4 is where students are going to analyze the data that they have collected. This is when they're going to decide if their findings support their hypothesis or if it debunks their theory, allowing them to compare what they thought would happen to what actually happened. And then we have step 5, which is generalizing findings. And this is where the students will put all of the information together. They should generalize the findings by showing how the questions or problems is connected to the findings and making sense of the process and findings. And lastly, we have step 6, and this is where the students reflect on their work as a whole, looking at the procedures and the process they took. This is where students will need to understand self-reflection and some additional guidance in reflecting on what they did and what they learned. This is also referred to as the metacognitive thinking. And this is an important part of the inquiry process and to learning in general. Having the ability to examine your own thinking leads to greater self-awareness, promotes growth and learning, which is, again, what we all want for our students, growth and a lifetime of learning. So now that we have a better understanding of the levels and the steps of inquiry, we should talk about what these are going to look like in the classroom. So we can do this first by deciding, what does the teacher do in the traditional classroom? Anybody?
Often it's just direct instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the teacher talks, they guide, they facilitate, they are teaching. And what are the students doing in a traditional classroom?
They're listening more
Mm-hmm.
than they're not getting to talk as much. They're kind of just being talked to instead of talking amongst themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say usually not engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of times they're either working independently, mostly following directions, routines, and procedures that were set forth by the teacher. So in an inquiry-based classroom, the teachers are more likely to just guide and facilitate learning and encouraging those students to be those true problem solvers, thinking outside the box. All right, and how can you implement inquiry into your classroom? So what areas can you see adding some inquiry models into your classroom? If you will fill out the Google Forms survey. And then I plan to share all of the responses with all of you after I receive them. And that is all I have for you guys. Thank you.
Good job. This is my favorite model of all times because this is what Hawk's Nest is built on. And being able to see it in action in all subject areas, I by far see the level of engagement that kids come when you allow them to think, discover, and create. Using that, we use the engineering design process, which is very similar to the scientific, not exact, but same concept. So what are your thoughts, questions, feedback?
I like the comparison of the traditional classroom and the inquiry-based classroom, because I think even when we are trying to strategically let kids explore, it's very easy to get into that habit of being so structured, you're not giving them that time. So I think even just that visual would be a good reminder to a staff in a presentation.
I really liked it too, because I know for myself, like I feel like I'm letting go of that control sometimes. Having those procedures in place are so important, especially, the beginning of the year. So really letting go of that and letting kids explore is sometimes hard, but a lot of really great things happen when you let them do that.
A lot of
I
great
have a
thinking that goes
question.
along with that. Yes, sir.
Why don't we do this more in school? And why don't we do it more? And why is when we do it, it's abandoned and not successful generally?
I think sometimes for teachers, it is time consuming. And when the county has already outlined a pacing guide and they want you to stay on it. It takes so much energy to plan this and to do it effectively. And then you really don't have time to get the kids they need to be in charge of how long it takes them to figure it out. And we don't always have the time to give them that.
I think that's a great answer.
I think another reason why it's difficult for teachers to do this one is if they don't establish good behavior management, students don't stay on task to do it.
There you go. Ding, 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 ding. Does it look good in the room? When somebody comes walking by that's doing an observation or a walkthrough, does it look good?
No,
No.
no, it
And
does
if
not.
you don't have good classroom management, it gets away from you, number one. And number two, even if you have good classroom management, it doesn't look like what we school ought to look like. And you have a bunch of knuckleheaded administrators that have this notion of what school is supposed to look like. And this is not it, by the way. Especially if you're letting kids swag it on the hypothesis. It looks kind of crazy. And so, although I'm like Dr. Payne, it is by far my favorite. It's what I do at the doctoral level. I teach inquiry and methodology, quantitative and qualitative. It is my thing. I love it, but it doesn't look good. I'll be the first to tell you. In a K-12 setting, it does not look good if we're into the visual piece. And I think Daphne hit the nail on the head as well. It's a whole lot of trouble, a lot of work, and then you get discouraged when the feedback comes negative from your administrator or somebody that walked by, or the parents start talking in the community about how your class is out of control. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth the pain.
I will tell you that if you decide as an administrator, you want to start this in your building and really launch it so that you can see that. We had a lot of success with it, and it's still going strong at Hawks Nest. But what we did was we started off, first of all, we had to develop the understanding that this is a model. It is a way to learn, but every lesson cannot be a PBL. Every lesson cannot be inquiry based. And so getting your teachers to understand technology is a tool. The instructional model is a method or a format that we can use, but everything, or the inquiry model, everything has a purpose. And so identifying which lessons this apply to, which units this applies to, is key. That's number one, is the planning component. And like Daphne said, it takes a lot of upfront planning, but it takes a lot of work off of you in the process. So it's changing that workload. But when teachers get started on it, you have to give them planning time to do this and to do it well. You have to provide training to them to understand how to do it and do it well. The second part is, like Emily said, you've got to have those procedures, and you as the administrator have to help them think through the procedures that need to be in place, because you are taking a lot of the control away from the teacher and putting it on the kids. My favorite saying always, and I think if you went into Hawks Nest right now and said this, they would echo it. Fun is not, is my part, and their response, chaos. So we can have fun learning, and I wanted my learning environment to be fun, but that's never chaotic. And when it gets to where it looks chaotic, we stop, because then we've gotten out of control and we're not focused in on the lesson. So just like when you do those turn-in talks or your table group talks, you have to have parameters that they have to work within to stay focused on the standard at hand or the topic at hand. You have to do those same things with their activities or lessons. I will tell you that when you start using them on a regular basis and you start cross-curricular planning with them, and this happens, we did it at Stanley with across subject areas, content areas where you change classes. When you start having the art teacher working on an art component of the project that you're working on, and art might look all different for every kid depending on what they're doing. You start letting the math teacher work on the math part, the ELA teacher work on the ELA part, the science teacher, and it's all coming together at a certain time. It is a really good thing to see what kids can come up with. I will tell you, some of our lowest performing students did some of our best work because they were able to own the learning and they were able to make sense of it and make meaning of it on their own because of the way that they were applying their learning. So if you ever decide you want to do that, please call me. I would love to walk you through some of the things that we did that made it work. But I will tell you, anytime I did a tour of Hawks Nest, I would say, first of all, this place it looks dirty. We clean up at the end of every day, but it is a mess all the time because there's always stuff everywhere. It's always loud. Now, when I say looks dirty, it was never dirty. There was paper, there was stuff. It's always loud because kids are talking, but I would always tell people when you go in the room, there's going to be a lot of noise and they're not going to get quiet just because you come in because they're working. Go listen to their conversations and you're going to hear good things. But what you didn't see was the teacher doing a lot of teaching. And that's because she would do her mini lesson and turn them loose and they would go and make meaning of the material. So it was really good. And our scores jumped the year that we did it, where it was the third year of doing it. Our fifth grade had the highest number of EC kiddos that we had ever had. And we had 95% of our students make a level 3, 4, and 5 on the science EOG. And out of those, and that's the core area that we used it the most. And out of those 95% that were proficient, 98% of them were a level 4 and 5. And we had about 17 EC kids on that grade level. That's pretty big stuff, but it's because of the way they were being taught. So good job to you on that. Does anybody else have feedback or any other comments before we get started on your next part? Okay, share my screen. And we're going to watch a few minutes of this classroom. You got a standard 4? Does everybody have a standard 4 or your standard 4 from last time? If you have the same exact one, just use a different color pen. It'll be fine. We're not going to watch but about 5 to 6 minutes. Next week, we're going to watch the last 5 to 6 minutes because I want to show you the difference. This is a high school classroom, and I want us to see different levels. So take some notes, and then what we're going to do is when we're done, Dr. Lamb, if you don't mind making me co-host, I'm going to put them in breakout rooms. So when this is done, we will go into breakout rooms, and you will work with your partner. And you and your partner will talk about how you rated. And then number 2, what would your takeaway, your coaching advice be? And then what would that look like in a Get Better Faster coaching session? Do you remember what we talked about with Get Better Faster? Give them one thing to work on and then practice it. Okay, so we're going to practice that today. Here we go.
This is kind of where that reputation and continues here in the West of the rugged individualism. Yes. The idea that the American, especially as we were continuing to expand West, love their independence and love their ability to run their own lives without a whole lot of people telling them what to do, where to go, and how to live. Then let's look at our first objective. We'll get to the others when we get to them. I can describe the opportunities and challenges of life in the West. the West. We talked about and introduced the West on Monday in the late 1800s and early 1900s for various Americans, minorities and whites alike, and Native Americans using primary and secondary documents. So that's going to be the focus of our first about 25 minutes of class here. What I have is a series of documents that I've copied for you, and you're going to be working with a partner. And each one of these documents have questions attached to them, okay? They're copied, but they're copied from the original. I redid the copies from the original so you can see exactly what you need to be seeing on these. If you're struggling with any of it, trying to figure out what something is, I do have the originals up here, and I'm going to be walking around facilitating anyway, so we can talk about it. But each one of them have questions attached to them. Some of it has to do with life of Native Americans. Some of it has to do with the buffalo, and disappearance of them. Some of it has to do with the life of a homesteader, which deals with other of our objectives up here. A few of them has to do with the Dawes Act and the assimilation of Native Americans during this time period as well. So it touches on a variety of different aspects that are the focal points of chapter 26. And so you're going to be digging into these in order to give you a little bit of background. Hopefully this will give us some fodder for discussion a little bit later in the class as well. Okay, so you understand what you're doing here? Each one of these questions, you and a partner can answer just one set of answers to those, and you will be turning those in at the end of this session, so you can get some a grade for that and credit for that, okay? Questions on that at all? Yes, no? No? Okay, then here's what I want you to do. I want you to partner up. Got 25 copies here, so if there's a few of you that want to work by yourself, that's okay. But for the most part, I'd like for you to be working in partners and be discussing these back and forth, looking at all this stuff, okay? So let's see, as soon as you have your partner, raise your hand and I'll get you your copy. There's a lot of different reasons, and you're hitting on one. One of it had to do with, you know, the Plains Indians use these buffalo in order to survive. Right? They lived a very symbiotic relationship with the buffalo on the plains. They followed them around, used them for a food source, used them obviously for teepees, for blankets, all kinds of different things. And you see in one of the images there, it tells you all the different things that the buffalo were used for by the Native Americans. So if you get rid of that source, then the Plains Indians don't have their way of life anymore, right? So that's part of it. But also you see that first image on the front talking about the rail lines. Yeah. They wanted to get rid of the buffalo in the region too, in order to be able to exactly more efficiently and not have it, you know, derail their trains or mess up their schedule. So I mean, it was a lot of different factors involved. Yeah. And it's capitalism too, right? I mean, the whites are going there. Some of them are wanting to make money. You know, these things were very valuable, and they became like a fad or a fashion to have a buffalo hide in your home. So not on a massive scale. No, they might use them for trade, but it wasn't marketed in this way. It wasn't commercialized in this way. Yeah. And if it was, then it was later, and it was when they were already losing their ability to live the way they wanted to live, and they were trying to adapt. Yeah. So jump to Dawes if you can. Statements about what do y'all think about assimilation? Kind of mean. It was, believe it or not, these are the people who sympathized with the Native Americans. There were some people who simply wanted to push them off into no man's land, not worry about them at all, their concerns. And then, right, well, out of your my land. Right, but so these are the people who were, you know, concerned about the Native Americans' well-being, because what they said was, this life is swallowing them up. This life, being American life, is swallowing up their way of life. Their buffalo is leaving. Their ability to feed themselves, to live the way they've always lived, is fading away. And so this is the best chance that we think that they have for success in what is surrounding them.
I think it like is kind of like, you know, the thing that I forget the term for it or whatever, it's like a qualitative negative or something like that. Qualitative negative? Yeah, that because I mean qualified negative. Yeah, that's what but it's terrible. But at the same time, they were probably gonna die if they helped them.
But at the same time, forced assimilation steals their culture.
Yeah. So I mean,
So it's, there's no good answer, really.
that's something bad, but it's not dying. It's probably
And by the 1930s, this was perceived as a mistake. And they go back to allowing the Native Americans to live the way they want to live and encouraging them to redevelop their tribal type of lifestyle and culture. But by then, generations of Native Americans had grown up under assimilation. So it was difficult to bring it back.
Yeah.
What I want to do is just touch up really quickly on some of the content that you all have been diving into through these primary and secondary documents with that activity, and explain a few things having to do with the Homestead Act and the Dawes Act to make sure you understand those principles. And then we're going to jump to a little bit of a video clip on the Heartland so you can have that out. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we left off with Mr. Woolley. All right. Okay. So let's jump forward a bit here. And we talked about the disappearance of some of the reservation life and some of the reservation land in the West as newer treaties were being formed. We talked about some of the encroachment of white settlers on Native American lands, whether it was through gold rushes or whether it was through the Transcontinental Railroad itself or the establishment of new towns. All these things impacting the natural way of life that Native Americans have been living for generations. And you saw some of those impacts on those pictures and images you were looking at earlier. Certainly that has to do with the Battle of Little Bighorn as well. Remember that there was a gold rush into the Black Hills in what is present-day South Dakota. The Sioux viewed the Black Hills as an area that was almost sacred to their people. And there was gold found there by white settlers. So what do you think the rest of white settlers wanted to do? Yeah, go get the gold. And there was a brief gold rush there into the Black Hills. The government kind of had a difficult time preventing white settlers from moving into the region. So they tried to work with the Sioux to build a road into that area through their reservation. The Sioux didn't particularly like that. And this brought federal troops to the region to try and protect white settlers and keep the peace, if you will.
Okay. Whoops, hold on. Stop my share. There we go. Okay, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. Somebody tell me what we're doing in our breakout room.
Coaching strategies, get better faster.
Coaching strategies, get better faster. What else should you be talking about?
Standard 4.
Standard 4.
Standard 4. So what you think went well, what would you leave him as a takeaway? Okay. So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms. Give me 2 seconds. Some of you have 3, but most everybody has. Let me do this. Hold on 1 second. I think I can go one more and we'll be good. Make sure everybody has somebody. We do. And I'm sending you out now. You've got about 8 minutes. I think Wood's frozen.
No. Not Wood.
Okay, there he went.
Okay.
I think what I saw was a strength was the fact that I mean the students were on task. They appeared to be able to handle the material he handed out, but of course, like I was wondering, are all kids using the same set of documents? Is it differentiated in any way? but I mean, they all seemed to be on task and seemed to understand the material. They were engaging with him, the ones that we could see.
Yeah.
And I felt like he was doing a good job of facilitating, like truly facilitating and like letting them talk and ask questions. But then he did kind of go back and tell them like what they needed to know also. So I don't know, it's hard for me. This is brand new. So
Yeah.
what did you think?
I thought kind of the same thing. And then the way that he was talking about the packet, I felt like it was just more talking about not really giving directions on what to do. Just here's the packet, it's going to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of letting the packet do more than what I felt like he was doing. And I was overwhelmed by all of the stuff on the board behind him too. Like I was trying to make sense of everything that was behind him at the same time.
Yeah, I was wondering if like him having them control of them looking at the documents was like them being able to have that inquiry piece of like he's not telling them too much, but then when he was listening to them, he was telling them, you know, if he heard something that he needed them to know, he told them.
Mhm.
But as far as technology goes, I mean, obviously there wasn't a whole lot of technology that he was using. So, but I feel like I hate to say that one for like everyone. So I feel like that's not right. Because I feel like we're always saying technology, differentiation, but yeah. So I think what were you thinking for a coaching piece like for next time?
Oh gosh. I mean, I kind of feel like maybe better directions. I don't know.
Ooh, me.
Dr. Lamb.
First thing I thought was what Emily thought. That board would have just, I'd have went, that was too much. You know me, I can't handle that much.
Mm-mm.
I would have used technology to put the directions up. I know it sounds stupid, but I'm a pretty simple fellow. But I didn't know what to do. And he had too much stuff on the board. And it was like, great day. I was kind of lost. I was putting myself in the position of a student. And here's a better idea. Why not just something as simple as using technology to list the directions on the board rather than trying to tell them and then having to ask if y'all got it, don't got it, what, you know. The kids, I don't know that they didn't know what to ask. I'm not sure that they understood the directions well enough to ask questions. That would be, I just thought, now after that, I thought he did pretty good, but I got off to a slow start myself. I work fine off lists. I know some people don't, but tell me what we're doing here. Just write it down. Just write it down.
I was going to say too,
use technology for that, but I felt like his lesson got off to a really rough start because what we were doing, the objective in my mind, or the directions were not clear. That's just me.
Yeah, so you and Emily kind of noticed that more than me because I think my mind is still trying to adjust to what a high school effective lesson looks like. So I really struggled. Like I like, and I was looking at the standard, and there was just so much in the standard that you can't really tell from what we saw. I think what you said about having directions with using technology would be a good coaching point. I was thinking since their age, like having them use like multimedia sources other than just on paper would have been really, you know, meaningful for them and their age. So I feel like you could have incorporated, you know, different options, because I know that's one thing, you know, the 21st century skills like that they need to be able to pick good and utilize good resources. So I think that, you know, that was kind of a shortcut to give it to him. But at the same time, I mean, I thought he did a good job of going around and talking to him and really support. I truly feel like he facilitated conversation. So I thought that was good. But yeah, I think technology could definitely be, I just feel like when I say that, I feel like it's wrong because it's like, well, that's what we always pick out about people's lessons is the technology part.
No, you know, full disclosure, again, I was a high school, I taught science, chemistry, physics, and that's why I said my job in the graduate school at Gardner Webb at the doctoral level is I teach methodology. I teach the scientific method. So now we're big into lists, science, you know that. But now normal people aren't, but we are. And that's why I said, but still, as a former high school teacher and a high school principal, his lesson was appropriate. I'm like you, he could, if he had the internet, he could have done some things to let them, use Chromebooks or whatever, but I don't know that piece of it. But we're real big in science and in high school about making sure that this is what we're going to do, being very clear, listed out, going through the steps. Science people are, but it works in all areas. In secondary, I think it works. Not so much with elementary kids. I'm not saying that I would give the same advice to an elementary, especially a primary teacher. But for a high school teacher, I think your directions need to be clearer than what his were. And you're going to ask these kids to work independently or in groups, whichever you want to say that is. But I'm not sure they knew what to do. I can't be sure of that. Now they may have known, but I can't be sure that they were, because now if they were, it was not because of his input. It was not because of teacher input that they were clear what their assignment was and what they were doing. He needs to be clearer in that. If you're going to turn kids loose, I mean, this group played along, but that was my point about, I can tell you right now, if you turn kids loose with the inquiry method, especially if you're swagging it on hypothesis, it gets crazy. It gets out, if you don't have good management, and even if you do, it looks crazy. Now, this bunch, I didn't feel like they had good directions. He turned them loose and they didn't tear his room down, but that's not going to happen every time in high school. Not going to happen every time in high school. It get away from you in a hurry in high school. You've lost them. And you won't get them back that class period. And it's not only an instructional technique, it's a management technique if you're going to try to do the inquiry model. You got to be very clear on what your instructions are. That's my 2 cents. Y'all, I'm wasting y'all's time.
Well, that's helpful because I'm lost with the older kids, lost. So, but that's insightful for me to know. So,
yeah.
What was your one good, Emily?
I mean, I feel like he knew his students, like the way that they had conversations. He's obviously put in the work to have like a relationship with them, because the conversation didn't seem strained. Like it seemed very easy for them to, the student and the teacher, to communicate with each other. I don't know. That was my.
Yeah, I thought that part was good. What would one of the things that I was thinking is, I mean, he did this as a quick and dirty. I get that. But what do you think about if he'd organized his groups and done it as a cooperative learning lesson?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the richness of the feedback wouldn't have been greater. But now again, that's a whole nother level of planning and organization, and that's not a quick and dirty. I mean, if you're going to do cooperative learning, you got to plan your groups and you got to be very intentional about everybody's role in the group and the assignments and all those things. I mean, he was basically doing kind of a, shoot from the hip, get together, do this right quick, in and out kind of thing. I get that. Everything, we don't have to do cooperative learning and explore everything to the nth degree. I get that. But the content of this was such that he was just trying to spur them to think, to get them to put themselves in the place of somebody from that era. He was trying to create empathy or a sympathetic vibration. I get what he was trying to do in his lesson. But directions would have been helpful. I had no qualms with the rest of his lesson. We could have debated whether he should have done it in pairs or cooperative learning, but no, I just didn't feel like that he got off to, he didn't get a strong start by not being more intentional with his directions. And again, when you're doing the inquiry model, you got to be very intentional with your directions. Otherwise, it gets away from you. And even if it doesn't get away from you in a bad way in terms of misbehavior, the conversations go someplace that you weren't intending them to go, especially if you're swagging it. And so, you know, you got to be real careful with the swag method anyway, with kids. Now, I do it with my doctorals all the time because they can handle that. You know what a swag is when you're forming hypothesis. Now, when you did your presentation, you were talking about, you know, they had to make educated guesses. That's what form hypothesis. Well, the opposite of that is the swag method, where it doesn't have to be an informed or an educated guess. It just could be any correlation or association or anything that's anecdotal that you think might be a connection. We call that the swag method. What does swag stand for? Stupid, wild ass guess. That's what we do with doctoral students. And we allow them to explore any connection that it doesn't have to be supported in the data or in the literature. It doesn't have to be just, you know, I think water makes birds fly. I saw every bird I've ever seen drinks water, and we would test that hypothesis. You can do that with doctorals, and that's where you get your best stuff. I'm not sure that, you know, that's a high wire act. That's very risky with you know, but maybe you could do that even with high school. But again, the problem with the swag method is not so much the misbehavior. They get off topic. They're talking about something totally unrelated. If you know that, and that's when you have to redirect them back. And that's the problem. That's when it gets really gets kind of messy. Is when, and it gets to looking, it kind of gets away from you. Even if they're not tearing your room down, you want them to talk about life on the plains, you know, during the era of the buffalo and the Indians, and they're over here talking about Indian bingo. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens if you're not very intentional and set parameters on what you're doing. And so even with my doctorals, we start out that way, but then we learn about heat, ice cream, and crime. You know, that's an example of seeing associations or correlations that don't exist. You know, you do know that ice cream consumption and crime go up and down at the same time. So you would think, well, if we just stopped selling ice cream, crime would stop. Nope. They're not related or correlated or associated with each other. They're associated with a third variable, which is heat. When heat goes up, crime goes up, ice cream consumption goes up. When it comes down, they come down. They are not, but ice cream and crime are not correlated. But that's the kind of stuff that you get wrong when you let them just kind of go on their own and swag it. But that's the kind, you have to teach them not to go down those false rabbit holes, though. That's a part of that. And so what happens is you get off topic, you start looking at crazy, and it just becomes, it gets out of control. And that's why teachers don't do it. It's like a high wire act every day. And you're trying to, you know, not fall off. And it becomes not worth the risk. And the amount of work that you have to put in it becomes too much. And so unless you're at a place which is a STEAM academy, a magnet like Dr. Payne was, where that's what you do, it's hard in a traditional setting to do this. It just is. All right.
Progress.
Everybody back? Got one or, I think that's right. Okay, so we're gonna get started. Tell me what you thought.
Recording in
Today, we're not going to go standard by standard by standard by standard. Overall, what would you have rated this person and this teacher and why?
Well, we just had the conversation, but Megan and I said developing in many ways because of the lack of engagement. He needed some lessons. Our takeaway was that we could work on maybe cooperative learning and not talking at the kids so much. He was just so fast and didn't give them the opportunity to speak. And like Megan said, he totally missed a great opportunity to be creative because he could have done so much with that lesson. So we said developing.
What does everybody else say?
Same thing.
Developing.
Developing.
So let me
Yeah,
go ahead, Heather.
I agree with developing a lot. Me and Paris said proficient on some, but and Wood might know this. In high school, especially at the AP level, that's how a lot of the classes look. The kids, because they behave, they just sit and listen and they just retain it. But if you have, like for me as an EC teacher, you sit there and do that in a class, kids are not paying attention. They're not gaining anything from it. So he needed to be more creative in engaging the students, especially if it wasn't an AP class.
And so I talked to Marsha and Megan, and one of the things I was telling them is that across the board, I think most administrators would have rated him either proficient or accomplished. And the reason I think that, and I'm not telling you that I don't agree with your rating, I'm telling you that I think they do that because many times they confuse engagement and compliance, and they confuse teaching and learning. Because what we want is engaged students who learn, not compliant students who listen. They will learn some things from listening, but we want to, whoa. Sorry about that. I don't know what just happened, but okay. We want kids who are going to be engaged. We want teachers who are going to engage kids. We want teachers who are going to hook kids. Now, as a new AP, before we talk about your coaching conferences that you would do, as a new AP next year, are you going to be able to go into a classroom after the first evaluation and mark this teacher developing and go hardcore? You got to change your way of teaching.
Yeah.
You got to look at their scores that they get. You've got to look at where you want them to go and how many things, even this developing teacher that you're saying, how many things are you going to give them to work on at one time?
Like one.
Wow. 1 to 2 at most. Now, the difference is that some people are like, nope, you're going to go in there and tell them everything they need to do. You can give them 3 or 4, and it's going to take you 12 weeks to be able to monitor that, right? Or you can give them one at a time, and you got a 3-week check-in time, and then you up it and add another one for 3 weeks. You're still going to get 3 or 4 over 12 weeks, but you're going to give them time to truly implement and focus on that strategy that you're teaching or that you're working with them on. What would your one strategy be to work with this teacher on to start? And what would be your rationale for getting them to make some changes? Who wants to start? Daphne.
One of the things me and Monica talked about was that he needed to be able to allow the students to process and to have some discussion and not just completely take over, because he was so engaged about what he knew that even when he went to them in small groups, he was, he would hear what they said and then he would take off on another tangent and just completely take over. So that would be one of our first recommendations, is just learn how to listen and see what the students are processing. And then we even thought about even suggesting, like, it was great that he did the, the pair share, but if he could have, instead of telling them they were right or wrong, if he could have just blended them with another group and still let them come up with a consensus, as opposed to him just making another, taking off on a tangent and telling them what he thought. So what he knew.
So what I want you to do is to rephrase that into one strategy you want him to focus on. How would you bring that in? Very clear, concise, because remember we talked about it has to be clear, concise. He needs to know exactly what he's got to do.
So we probably would say something like, to increase your student engagement, we'd like to see more partnering and giving students time.
Okay, so she's saying more partnering and giving students time. Let's take that and make it even more specific. Who can help me out with that? What can we do with partner groups? Because he was doing partner groups. What can we do with partner groups and giving time? How can we make that more specific, more clear?
You could do a strategy like think, pair, share, or something like that.
You can give them a
Get
specific strategy. So we could do think, pair, share. That's one option. What else could you do?
The inquiry model.
The inquiry model.
Could he have them like actually have a product that they produce at the end versus like turning in his worksheet type thing, because then they have to have time to work together and plan it and make it?
You could do that. You could have something, a product that they had to do. Let's think about him. We've said he's talking too much and kids aren't thinking. So he's putting them into partnerships. We still want him to go around and facilitate, correct? So what is a strategy, or what is something very clear and very specific you could tell him he could do differently when he's facilitating?
Could he have like a
Talk less.
Well,
Sorry.
we have a time limit where he can only meet with every group for like 30 seconds and move on, or something like that, where like
you could give him
doing a mini lecture at every pair.
Sort of like we do with our counselors. They do 1 minute, 1 minute conferences with all of their kids. So that's a conversation. What he could do that. What else could he do? Somebody said talk less. That's true. But if they're just sitting there, what is he going to do? Is he going to start talking to them? Because we're saying talk less. So the answer would be no. What could he do?
Questions. He needs to
He
ask
can ask more questions.
He should
He
ask
could ask more.
questions and be quiet. What would that promote?
conversation among the students.
Engagement.
Conversation, engagement, but students would begin what?
Critical
Learning.
thinking.
Yeah.
That critical thinking. I heard somebody in one of the groups say they weren't really even doing critical thinking. They weren't really doing any of this. They weren't doing this. We've got to create a learning environment where they are thinking. So when you mark him as developing or proficient around allowing opportunities for students to think critically, then you're going to say one way we could work on that is you did great with putting your groups in partnerships, because that was good, right? He used partnerships. We need to make that practice more effective. So instead of you going around and talking to them, go and listen, go and ask questions and let them think and listen to their thinking. Because if we hear their thinking, we can measure their understanding, right? Who else has something? So we've got two things that we've worked on right now. We've worked on when he goes around to groups, he can talk less and ask more questions and listen more, right? Then we also said that the students need to be collaborating about their topic. Maybe they need to have some opportunities for a different type of assignment. Maybe he needs to explore, because our highest kids be creative? Can they do things outside of the box, or do they need to sit there and do that low level answer a question? Can he put those
We need
questions?
some differentiation.
Do what, Wood?
What's the differentiation here?
He could do different things for his different groups. That's exactly right. So you could leave him 2 or 3 things for him to think through of, because you remember we're trying to collaborate. So I would be talking to Emily and I would say, Emily, so I see I have you at proficient over here on this thinking critically. You allowed your kids to be in groups. I saw that they did partnerships, and some of them worked in groups of 3 even. And they were engaged in the assignment. However, one of the things that I noticed is when you went to each group, tell me what your purpose in going to the groups were. What were you trying to accomplish? Asking some questions. And then he talks. Okay, well, what I saw was you would go to the groups and you would start to listen to their thinking. And then you would help them think through the process. So what could we do to help engage them or encourage them to think more? And you want him to come up with, I need to be quiet. I need to stop. And then you want him to say, okay, and you're leading and guiding that thinking. Do y'all do that with your kids right now when you want them to come up with something that they're working on? You coach them to come up with what they need to focus on, right? You're doing the same thing. You're going to talk to him about, I need your time with them very purposeful. And so if you're saying you need to talk less, what are you going to do if they're stumped? Or what are you going to do if they're off track? Instead of telling them, you're going to ask a question to draw them back into what you want them to do. Instead of going and telling them all the answers, you're going to listen to their understanding. So that's two things I want you to really work on over the next 3 weeks. I want you to work on listening when you facilitate, and when they're stumped, they're not engaged, or they're off track, I want you to ask them questions to bring them back in, and be careful not to give them the information. Let them think through it. You see how we just gave him 2 things to work on? Very specific to that one standard that we rated. Dr. Lamb, what's your thoughts?
Well, I did what Daphne said you're not supposed to do. I talk too much in my group, so I'm gonna have to do better than that. My thought is, at the end of what you just said there, you kind of, the crux of my argument with this lesson. The reason why he was having to talk so much and get them back and say, this is what you were supposed to take from this is, he didn't give them clear directions on what to do. See, that would be my number one, is Emily and I were both, our heads were kind of spinning from all the stuff he had on the board up there that didn't have anything to do with the assignment. And see, I'm easily distracted. I'm old. And so I didn't know what to do. Rather than having all that stuff on the board, you need to have clearly, you could have used it overhead or smart board. This is what we're doing. This is the directions, and this is what you're supposed to be learning. The reason why he was having to go around and tell them is because they didn't really know what they were doing. Now, we talked about cooperative learning. Everything doesn't have to be cooperative learning. He was doing a simple partner or lesson, activity. It doesn't have, you don't have to go full-blown cooperative learning every time you do something, but every time you turn students loose to do guided practice, they have to know what they're doing. And if they don't, they tend to get, even if they're good students and they're not tearing the building down, they're not on task. They're not engaged with what you want them to be engaged with. And even though they may not, be up, shooting spitballs and fighting, they might as well be, because they're not engaged. They didn't know what to do. What I noticed from him, he was having to go and basically tell them, this is what I wanted you to learn from this. And was doing many lectures, because I don't think they had a clue as to what to do, other than get together and talk. They certainly didn't display any understanding of what the purpose of the activity was, because I wasn't clear what they were doing either.
So I want to tell y'all what I do. Thank you, sir. When I don't know if y'all know this about me, but I am a sticky note girl. If you saw my kitchen table right now, I have sticky notes everywhere. It's where I put down my thinking and then I bring it all together at some point. But I started off with, he had his essential questions. He talked about primary and secondary documents. They use partner groups. When I looked at the individual students, when he was talking, I went around and scanned the room and I said, everybody but one kid was visibly engaged. That doesn't mean they were truly engaged, but they were compliant. And then he's, I don't know what that meant. I did like at the end, he said yes, no, as far, not at the end, but at the end of his little lecture part, he said yes, no. I go through all this with my teacher. I sort of go through my script with them when I'm going over their evaluation, because I'll say, I really liked how you said yes, no. You made sure that they looked at you and made contact, that they were hearing what you just said to them. And then my next thing, my little light bulb right here, I put, he talked a lot. No whys. Never once did he say, why? Why do you think that? Why did that happen? Never once. And that is a great word. If you've got a teacher that you're trying to guide into knowing how to ask questions, 90% of the time, if they just say, tell me why, they're going to get some thinking going on, right? And I said, my strategy right off the bat was, when facilitating, ask questions, let them think. Too many of our teachers work too hard to show that they know it. Their role is to guide the thinking of the students so that the students can own it. Then I said, oh, looking from the front of the board back, your room looks really good. But that's another piece that I would talk to him about. The front of that room's got to be cleaned up. Those 50,000 EQs up on that board, he's got to minimize that and make that very specific so you can look at the board and know what's going on. And then I said, the girl that was talking in that lesson, she was going somewhere. But he cut her off and said, but at the same time, and then he started talking again. So he cut her thinking right off. And then I said, we were using primary and secondary documents when I went back to the very beginning. Did y'all see anybody use those documents? So he didn't have them go back and cite anything, which goes right back to what the Dr. Lamb said. Part of their directions, that clear, concise directions so that they know what to do, is you were using primary, secondary documents, but nobody used their documents. Wonder why? And you stop as the administrator and you get quiet and you let them process through. Not because it's a gotcha, not because I'm mad at you, but we got to fix that. It's great you're using primary, secondary documents. However, can I tell you as future administrators, if you don't take this kind of notes, and you're going to hear principals tell you, you don't have to write all that down, and you don't have to write all this stuff down. But if you want to go back and be able to put your puzzle pieces together, write this stuff down. Shorthand, write everything going on. That's what I sit and script. Why? Because then I was able to go back and look at my notes and say, I loved how he was talking about we're using primary and secondary documents. But then when they did the work, nobody used those documents. Nobody referred to them. That might not be a strategy that I tell him he has to do right away, but I know on my notes, that's going to be something we focus on. And then I take this to do my write-up. But this is what I use when I go over there. Before I ever look at your ratings, I go through this document with you when I meet with you as a teacher. And I say, let me tell you what I saw. I start off with, let's talk about what you did. Tell me, I would say, Wanda Reed, tell me how you think you did in your lesson. Tell me what your goal was. What were you accomplishing? How did you feel? And I give them 5 or so minutes to talk about what they thought. And then I'll say, well, let me tell you what I observed. And they know I'm going from front to back with my notes. And I'm going to go through and say, this was really good. This was really good. Now let's talk about how we can make it better. Because some teachers, I will tell you, you'll have 1 or 2, sometimes a few more teachers in your building that you, and I hope we're going to observe one of those. I think it's in 2 weeks. But you're going to have some teachers that you're like, I don't know what to tell you to do to get better. Well, that was awesome. But I will tell you, one of my greatest things that I tried to do as an administrator was every time I left a teacher, I always gave them something to work on. And the reason I did that was it never became, she's out to get me, because I gave every single person something to work on. My very best teacher got something, because our whole vision mission, we're inspiring success and a lifetime of learning, which means our teachers have to understand it's a lifetime of learning. So unless you are fully distinguished, there's always room to improve, right? I wanted to show you this because next week we're going to do one more, and I'm going to have you script, and I want you to come back and see if you can make some connections, okay? I found a different video that I like that's going to give us a lot of good talking points. All right, so we talked about inquiry model and the vocabulary model. I didn't call it right. It's the vocabulary. Megan, what was the first word?
Vocabulary acquisition.
Acquisition model. Thank you. I was trying to say another word and it wasn't right. And I knew that. The vocabulary acquisition model. And we watched a high school teacher. How many of you elementary people went, oh my goodness, in the high school classroom? Last week, how many of you high school people went, oh my goodness, in the elementary classroom? What is so important to remember, regardless of whether you get put in a high school, a middle school, or an elementary school, good teaching is good teaching. You can go back to the standards and make sure that the standards align, but good teaching is good teaching. You are looking for our students truly engaged in learning, our teachers giving students the opportunity and the environment to think, learn, and grow. Okay? Does anybody have anything for the group? Saturday, I'm going to give it back to Dr. Lim in just 1 second. Saturday, I have a email that's ready to go out that I will send to you in just a moment that tells you what your chapter is, and 9 o'clock at the Raider. Okay, Dr. Lamb?
I want to do a follow-up to last week's lesson. I want to make sure that I'm clear about assessment driving instruction. Too many times we think assessment is a test, or it's some kind of a formal quiz, a test, a demonstration. Assessment drives instruction means you've got to be reading the room. Tonight's video was a perfect example of he wasn't reading the room. He was not assessing what kids knew. What he was, my take was, he recognized that they weren't following what he wanted them to do. And so rather than stop and say, wait a minute, I got to go back and give better or clearer or different directions, he just tried to tell them what he wanted them to know. When we talk about assessment driving instruction, we're not talking about formal assessment. We're talking about scanning and assessing. I'm pitching, are they catching? What do I need to do to fix this on the fly while I'm going? He did not do that. And this is exactly what I was referring to. Please don't think when I say assessment drives instruction that we look at our test scores all the time. I'm talking about in the moment, when you're in the room with those students, you've got to be constantly assessing whether they're giving you back what you want from them. And if not, is it their fault, or is it that you were not clear in what your expectation was? And obviously he wasn't getting what he wanted from these pairs. And so what he did was just says, let me tell you what you're supposed to know. That is not good teaching, by the way. It's okay. That's why I said to my group, it's okay for a secondary lesson. It's okay, but it's not great. It's not what we really strive to be. It's passable, but it could have been so much more than that if students had been clearer. And when he assessed that they weren't getting it, rather than stopping and trying to make it work, he just blustered right on through and just told them what he wanted them to know. Well, he might as well just done lectures from the beginning. It would have been the same. All right. Thank you for your time tonight. I enjoyed it as always. I always try to learn something. If you don't know much, you learn something every day.
Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your week. I will send you an email tonight before I go to bed to tell you what chapter. And remember, you're going to be the expert, and we'll all come together and work on our presentations for next week.
Dr. Lamb, are you going to be on for a second?
I am.
Okay.
Y'all have a great evening.